Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our chat on the future of microbial sciences. I am joined today by two very distinguished guests that I'll introduce to you right away. Started from my very far left is Dr. Steve Finkel, who is the president of the American Society for Microbiology. During his day job, Dr. Finkel is a professor at University of Southern California, professor in molecular and computational biology. He is also the dean of graduate and professional education at the University of Southern California. Right next to me is Dr. Colleen Kraft. Colleen is a professor in the Department of Medicine in the Division of Infectious Diseases at Emory University. She's also director of the Clinical and Virology Research Lab. And in her abundant spare time, she is in the leadership of the hospital, the Emory Hospital, as the Associate Chief Medical Officer. Steve, Colleen, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Good morning.
You enjoying the meeting?
Very much. It's nice to be back in person.
That's wonderful. So, Steve, if you're talking about, like to start with you, if you're talking about the future of the microbial sciences and what is happening, what a great session you put together last night at the President Forum, right on this topic. What is your take-home message from that?
My take-home message is, well, I came out optimistic, which was good. There's always challenges, of course, but getting three scientists like that together and hearing about the way they're all working on different aspects of the same question, but using very different techniques and very different perspectives, but coming together with a way forward that really is very exciting. I found it very energizing.
Are you optimistic about the future?
I'm very optimistic about the future of the microbial sciences. I think there's, between the combinations of technology changes and just all the kinds of questions in the world that microbes touch on, I think that there's only a need for more and more folks like us who think about the effect of microbes on the environment, on populations, on food systems, on manufacturing. There's just so many places where microbes play an important role. So I don't think you can be anything but optimistic. Obviously, always challenges, but overall optimistic.
Yeah, tell us something about what do you see as what's holding us back? If we want our future to be that bright, as we heard last night from Gloria and from the others, what do we need to do to make sure that nothing gets in the way of that?
Well, funding is something that's front of mind for almost all folks, certainly in academic.
Especially deans.
In deans, scientists, academics, but also in industry. We have friends in industry, colleagues in industry who also sometimes wish they had more resources to do what they think needs to be done. I think it's really about education, educating our own community, educating our leaders, our political leaders, industry leaders, etc. What do we need to really push the science forward to help everyone? So, more money is, we always say more money.
Yeah.
But we also need to use those resources wisely, and we need to engage our leaders in a way that will help them understand that it's not just so that I can do my research, but that from my basic science will come the applied science later that will help with real world problems.
Hold that thoughts about the message, send more money. I want to come back to it because I'm going to push you a little further on that. But before that, I want to hear from Colleen. You enjoying the meeting?
I'm loving the meeting.
What was what did you learn that you didn't know before you came in?
From my personal science standpoint, I learned that some of the applications of work that I'm doing on what is known as the terrestrial plane, because I went to the space microbiome talk, has application extraterrestrially. So that's been kind of exciting to think about.
That's awesome. There's a book that came out not too long ago by Andy Weir, Project Hail Mary, which I know you read. Are we ready to have microbes that's going to propel us out of space?
I was really excited having read, and I'm not sponsored by Andy Weir or anything like that, although I do hope he makes an appearance in our future at this meeting. But having read The Martian and Project Hail Mary, I think some of that reality, I didn't realize how far we were getting in that reality until going to the session yesterday. So that was kind of exciting, and that's not my area of research.
Right. But this is the beauty of microbiology, right? It really touches everything. And it's about agriculture, it's about food, it's about health, and it's about exobiology, outer space. It's about, energy and the microbes that can really be the fuels to as a solution to space travel. It's just mind-blowing. And what is not possible today, it doesn't mean it may not be possible in some form or shape tomorrow. Steve, I want to come back to what you were saying about the message that every dean and every research always sends, which is send more money. We need more money, and that is clearly very, very important. I've been hearing from the session yesterday and in general how little we know, and that resonates with me a ton. I am actually convinced that we always, especially when we do advocacy, we tout our science advances, how much we have discovered. And I always think, but this is what? Probably 5% of what we need to know. And I think I am exaggerating because it's probably even less than 5%. So that's all true. However, I think that there's probably an evolution of how we see science and the workforce and the need for money. I always thought that science is not a democracy, but science is a meritocracy. That it's a place where those who can do the science and have and can show that they can thrive actually get ahead. However, my thinking has evolved in that, and it's probably not as clear cut. Because we learned through all the work that we're doing on diversity, equity, and inclusion that plays a really big role in the meritocracy, and that not everybody really has the chances. And if you look at, as a dean, if you look at the distribution of the resources across the countries and the universities, there are actually a very small number of institutions that have disproportionate amount of money compared to others. And certainly they do great science, and certainly they attract great scientists, and certainly they attract great students who will become great scientists, and it's a feedback loop that actually runs the risk of excluding or actually not allowing others to enter into the system. And there could be some great science happening there. I know you've been very passionate about, and you've done great contribution about this issue of equity and inclusion. So my question for you is, how do you reconcile the democracy with the meritocracy, with the equity and inclusion, and guaranteeing that Colleen can get in outer space with great science advances, that we don't want to have any shortcoming on that either?
So you raised two different questions in your question. The first is the idea of the meritocracy, and in the abstract, we would like to believe, and I think in most of our experiences, worthy science gets funded. And that has generally been my experience over the last 2.5 decades of working with study sections and panels and different things. But anyone who's ever been on a study section also knows that there's a tremendous amount of science that's deemed worthy if there's enough resources. And we've all been in situations where sometimes there's, everything is, all is above the bar and should be funded. And that's where the lack of resources comes in, right? There's always more worthy science being proposed than there are resources to fund it. So that's a fundamental problem with the system across all agencies. Granted, resources are always limited, but when you have a situation where routinely you have a collection of prepared, thoughtful evaluators saying that all of these are worthy, but we only have the resources for a subset of them, then choices get made. So then the question becomes, how do those choices get made? And is there a tendency towards, these particular institutions or these folks with these track records are being given an edge because of past performance, and then you have new folks who are coming into the system who may be less well known, but their science has been deemed worthy. And so it's been a really important issue to make sure that we educate those folks who do the evaluation. These are mostly volunteers working for different agencies, to start thinking about the diversity of the applicant pool, and don't just go with the old ways of success breeds success, because there are many folks who could be very successful given the opportunity. So this is something we all have to be very, very mindful of. And again, I'm focusing mostly on academic scientists at study sections and that model, but I think this permeates all of society and anywhere that resources are being allocated, anywhere we're doing hiring. So we have to think about the potential of folks and actually the ideas that are being presented, and broaden our thinking and make sure that we're conscious of the fact that diversity is strength, and you don't know where the next good idea is going to come from, and that we have to really broaden that pool.
I'd like to add to it, although I'm not as much of a student of Tocqueville as you are. So if anybody needs a 5,000-page book to read, or however long it is, about these types of governments, I guess you would recommend that. But I do think that, from my standpoint, meritocracy only exists if there's equity underpinning it. And we've heard a lot about the difference between equity, equality, and availability, really, of resources. So I think equity, in order for it to be a meritocracy, equity has to be the foundation. And I think that's the thing that I'm really seeing in ASM this meeting.
Wonderful, Colleen, and you're perfect lead into the next question I wanted to ask you. In a few weeks, a few days, you're going to be president of ASM. Steve is going to pass.
Steve keeps reminding me.
The baton. And based on what Steve was saying and what you just summarized here, what do you see the role of an organization like ASM to do exactly what Steve was saying? How is there a role, and what is your vision for an organization like ASM to ensure, if you look around, the hallway, the lecture hall that we have here, there's people from all over the world, great, diverse, very young crowd. I think we should feel a big responsibility of how we connect these people. So what do you think in this respect as you come in as president of ASM?
So to try to make it concise, because I think we could talk about this for a long time, I think one of the things that's the most important to me is generosity and mentoring. So that some of the individuals that are here from around the world are here because they're resourceful and they've figured out how to be successful in their systems with or without support. And so I think what ASM can do is really this is something that Steve is very passionate about. So I would say this is a thread that's being woven through the presidency. It's not individual visions. It's we're trying to weave a thread through ASM, but that we are teaching best practices. We're teaching people how to be resourceful, teaching people how to advocate for themselves professionally. These are all the things that we've gone through as professionals. Myself as a woman and mother have had specific challenges that then I pass along those lessons learned to the future. And I think we want to do that all across the board, up and down, back and forth, to try to get successful people everywhere. So some people just need a little connection. You could say you need more funding, but maybe you haven't asked the right person at your university to give you that travel award, et cetera. And those are very granular, but that's sort of how I think about mentoring and advocating in your own entity, but then having ASM support you in how you be successful in your own entity.
That's wonderful. And with this kind of vision and leadership, I think we're going to be in a good place. And for those who may not know, actually, I think I would like to mention here, because it's exactly what Steve and you are saying, Colleen. The new program that ASM has developed this year, the Future Leaders Mentorship Program, which is a year-long program where 130 young scientists have received funding to attend this meeting and to do other activities. But as I always say, it was not just a check for microbial tourism to go visit cities, but actually they were paired with 140 mentors that can guide them, and really through the experience of how can you make the most of the meeting. And making the most of the meeting can really be making those connections that will help propel them into the weave of science in a way that maybe just in their institutions or wherever they happen to be could not have been as easy. So these are very concrete aspects that I think exemplify the vision that both of you have put forward. I think we should be very proud of that.
And I think one thing I'm excited about is that there's as many mentors as there are students. And I think that really speaks. That has been my career experience with ASM, is that there's an abundance of people that want to help individuals get to their next phase, figure out what their next phase is, help them make connections. I've been involved in many of those discussions even this week, so it's really exciting.
And I would like to thank all those 140 mentors that volunteer their time on top of everything they do. We see so much engagement from the ASM members in these type of activities and many more. So really, thank you. It's not that you don't know how to fill your day typically, and this is something that we ask to do on top of that. But as you can hear, there's a lot at stake here, and so we really hope that the time that you're putting into this is a wise investment that will have an impact.
Yeah, and I just really want to reiterate, the money part notwithstanding. The other thing ASM is really good is about making these connections. And we were in a meeting the other day, and where Colleen and I and a couple other folks in the room shared how early in our careers, an experience at ASM, the opportunity to give a talk when you were fairly junior, the opportunity to be at a poster session where someone came by and asked that critical question. I mean, for me, ASM is about making connections. I've been a member since I was an undergraduate, and every time I came to a meeting, I had some really important interaction with some more senior person who really cared and took an interest. And they didn't know me. They just asked me, but it was almost always they asked me a really good question. And then I got to ask questions back. Yeah. And people are so generous with their time. And that's been my experience of ASM the entire time I've been a member is, we really do care about nurturing our younger investigators. I still take that very seriously. And it's just a really great community. And this community building aspect of what we do is so essential.
And I think it's not traditional. It can be traditional, but it can be non-traditional. So as a clinician and clinical microbiologist, in some ways I didn't fit. I don't actually think there's a phenotype for ASM. I think everyone is welcome, and we want that diversity, but also diversity of workplace. I think that it's, I found really early on the ability to propose symposia and be on national committees, and that directly helped me to go up on service in my promotional tract at my university to do that. So ASM helped me have a national reputation, which was amazing. I'm not sure that would have happened in other societies I was involved in. So that really made a difference for me. And then I think what you were saying about mentoring, I see Alex McAdam back here in the Journal of Clinical Micro. So being mentored and being an editor was an amazing experience for me. And so I learned about my strengths and about things I didn't know that to me are not the traditional, like I have a research question and I want to figure out how to get funding or go to the next level. I guess I consider those traditional. But there's a lot of non-traditional things that you can learn and things you can participate in with ASM that really, for me, have been career-changing.
And I would like to thank you, Colleen, for saying this. Not everybody may know that ASM engages about 1,000 leaders in volunteer position in various committees or role throughout the years. And there's a lot of opportunities, as Colleen just highlighted, which can be very beneficial for your own career to get engaged and gain visibility and learn how to lead, how to serve, and that. And this year, with under our idea, our diversity, equity, and inclusion activities and restructuring, we have made all the applications for these committees open. So there are success profiles defined for what is needed for those positions. And then anybody can apply, self-nominate and nominate. So we've seen never before that many applications for these committees, an unprecedented number of applications of people who raise their hand or who are nominated to do this. And what you just heard from Dr. Kraft, that was important to her career to do that. But we wanted to go beyond the tap on the shoulder and say, hey, I know, Colleen, you should apply for this, but really try to give the opportunities as open as possible. So please when you see these, do nominate people that you think would be a good fit. Do nominate yourself, because it can be beneficial to the organization, it can be beneficial to the field, and it can be beneficial to you. It's not like a perfect trifecta, doesn't it?
And I think also what I've observed in being a part of the reviewing of the applicants is we're going to mentor people through the application process, right? So how do you answer, or how do you put into a statement your own DEI ideas? So I think even if you don't get your committee, accepted into your committee initially, I think you're going to find that you're going to get a lot of ways to apply for professional things, and ASM is going to sort of be preparing you for that because you're applying for things through ASM, and I think ASM is cutting edge in terms of what they're asking for these applications.
And the title of what we discussed is The Future of the Microbial Sciences, and ASM really believes that the future of the microbial sciences, one component of that is clearly its workforce. And building a workforce that is as diverse, as welcoming, and as inclusive as possible is the cornerstone for really ensuring that the science advances will be there. And so all our activities on inclusion, equity, and diversity are really geared not on us, but on the field. Our goal is to make the field as diverse and as welcoming as possible. And of course, by doing that, we want to be like that. We want to lead by example. That's obvious. But it's not about us. It's about the field. Steve, you're about to say something.
And I just wanted to also add, for any graduate students or postdocs who are listening now, or anyone who knows graduate students and postdocs, there's also a place for them at ASM to begin to be involved as leaders, to begin to volunteer in other activities. The one that immediately comes to mind, and I've been talking quite a bit about this at the meeting, is our advocacy program, where we will train graduate students and postdocs, and I went through the training as well, to then go meet our elected officials and Capitol Hill staffers. And it's a very, very rewarding program. If there are any PIs in the audience who think, I don't want my grad students spending time going and becoming a political activist, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about 3 or 4 hours of training, and then a day, either virtually or in person, where you're interacting. But my experience has been our political leaders, and especially their staff, love to interact with us. We are educated, we are knowledgeable, and they need us. And they need to hear about our science and our needs and the things that we think are important. And they're very receptive to it. And the graduate students and the postdocs who have participated have found it to be an incredibly rewarding experience. And then they go back to the lab and everything is okay.
Steve, you were on the Hill just a couple of days ago, and you visited Senator Richard Burr's office Senator from North Carolina. How was your experience?
It was actually a really excellent experience. Senator Burr has been a long-standing friend of science, a very strong supporter of funding basic research. And so we met with his staff, with Mary Lee Watts from our advocacy office. Virginia Miller and I went, Virginia as a constituent. And what I was very, very impressed with was the degree of respect that ASM apparently holds with these staffers. We help propose policy. We were there to present some recognition, but there was also policy discussion that we had. And there's a couple of items that were coming up, bills that directly would affect how research is done in the United States. ASM has had a long-standing relationship with this legislation, and seeing how the staffers really were asking for our help as an organization to guide the policy.
Exactly.
And the back and forth. It was very impressive. And we're having impact. I am absolutely convinced that as a society, we're having impact affecting legislation in ways that are supporting all of our members across all sectors: education, biotech and industry, bioeconomy, all sorts of commerce things. It's really impressive. The effort that's been created here is having major impact, and it's affecting all of us in the society.
And for those of you who may have not been at the advocacy reception a few nights ago, I think the video that we received from Senator from Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin, please go watch it, because it's a perfect It's so beautiful. It talks about the Pandemic Prevent Act, and it really goes to what Steve is saying about the interaction of scientists in informing policy, and it's really important. Colleen, what's your experience on the Hill? I know you have a lot of experience.
Well, I think also just Senator Burr's team is fantastic, and it's an extremely smart group of staffers. So it's really exciting to talk about people that think about the same things as you. It depends on the office, but for sure in Burr's office, there's a lot of challenges because they're looking at it from an even higher level. Because they're looking at it from a national level and a federal perspective, and that teaches you a lot. I think what I wanted to add about advocacy is that, if I don't know if you've felt discouraged about the political climate in the last few years. If you have, then I think advocacy is your place because it's a way you can feel like you're doing something, you're asking for something that is really bipartisan, and I find it enjoyable, very much so.
And a reminder, everyone, and I want to transition to another topic before our time is up, but a reminder to everyone that advocacy works. Advocacy works. If they don't hear from us, they're going to think that everything is fine. And if they hear from us and if we are credible and constructive, it works. Not always, but for example, this year ASM was instrumental in transforming the Advanced Molecular Detection Program at CDC that is building a national infrastructure for genomic detection. And that was a $35 million program. ASM helped transform this in a $1.75 billion program that is now affecting all clinical microbiology labs, all public health labs. And if we wouldn't have worked with the offices and the legislation on that, certainly that would not have happened in this form and shape. I would like to transition in the last few minutes to something that I think people here would like to hear from you, and it's about your day job. And it's about your science. So briefly for both of you, Steve, you do some phenomenal work on microbe producing electricity. Tell us about that.
So for those of you who don't know my work, I study long-term survival and evolution of bacteria. And over the years, I've been fortunate to be involved with a few programs where our kind of thinking would have been useful. One was the bacterial battery program. It's called Microbial Fuel Cells. It was funded by the Air Force, and it was under a bioenergy portfolio. And we were helping to develop, using a microbe called Shionella oneidensis, a system where we could actually take the respiratory ability of the microbe, which could actually deliver electrons out of the cell, and use it as a source of energy. So very briefly, we had built a little gizmo where if we put in a little bit of carbon source, we could make a light bulb go off. And that's because the organism will respire oxygen just like we do. But of course, in the absence of oxygen, it could respire lots of other things and use lots of things as a terminal electron acceptor, including a wire. As that program was transitioning, I got asked a really provocative question by an Air Force program officer, which was, does this extracellular electron transport thing happen inside people? And to be frank, I had never thought of it. And I said, that's a really great question, which was, I had no idea what the answer was. So I said, give me a month to think about it and I'll come back to you. And I started doing some reading, and what I really learned was that we don't know a whole lot about how respiration works in the human gut. So we took some samples and we placed it into our microbial fuel cell system, a modified version of that. And what we could tell you is that there are microbes in the human gut that actually can do extracellular electron transport, and they will deliver their electrons to an electrode. And we have now done this with fresh samples from human volunteers. This all happened just before COVID, so we're ramping back up again. But I can tell you with great confidence, I'm going to tell you with great confidence, it's happening inside all of us right now, that we have microbes that are able to take their electrons and use something else as a terminal electron acceptor. I don't know what that is right now inside us, but in the system where there's an electrode that's able to accept it, we can go from fresh feces directly into our gizmo and immediately get electricity production. So that's something that's been really, really
That is
fun.
fascinating. And there's been a lot of work in this, like, for example, also on phages, right? The M13 phage in building batteries.
There's been all sorts of applications of different technologies for creating energy sources. The good news is it works. I mean, this is something that works. The bad news is we're not going to run our cars on it. But there are some really specific applications that I'm particularly excited about. In many of these systems, you can use sewage, spoiled beer. There's all sorts of sources of nutrient that the microbes can do this with. And you get two byproducts. You get out clean water and electrons. And so if the power needs are not particularly high, there's some really wonderful applications. One of our former grad students actually started a company based on this. She's developing deployable systems to clean wastewater at, for example, agricultural waste from livestock, where there's ponds full of runoff from livestock waste, where you can now have a self-fueling system to help clean that water. So that's a really great application.
That's wonderful. And I would say that if we look forward to 2040 and the optimistic scenarios that we can envision, tapping the fact that microbes are by far the best chemists in the world, if we really can understand what they do, we can really use them to our advantage and to solve really, really big problems. And it looks like you're on that path. Thank you, Steve. Colleen, towards on your science, you've been working very hard on some big problems, starting from fecal transplant and big issues in that space. But also, I'd like you to mention and we thank you for that, the terrific leadership that you showed during the Ebola crisis, for also caring for the first patients that came to the United States.
Yeah, I think the fact, as a gut microbiome researcher in patients, it excites me to think about that our poop can make a light bulb go off. So that's, there's nothing that makes me happier. So
my kids will be so happy to talk to you.
I know. And I have 3 sons, so it's really just all about poop all the time. I'm really interested in using both figuring out a diagnostic, and again, this is what I got excited during the space lecture yesterday, a diagnostic to say that your gut is dysbiotic or abnormal, and then trying to figure out what type of therapeutic to give you to make your gut microbiome more diverse and enriched. And we kind of heard some of the reasons why you might want a healthy microbiome last night. In terms of the Ebola virus work, I always say my real love is gut microbiome work in patients, but it keeps getting waylaid by pandemics. So it was completely waylaid when we had 4 patients with Ebola virus disease at Emory. But what came out of that was this intense desire to protect our healthcare worker force from both infectious threats, but then also from mistakes, so safety. And so that kind of goes with my healthcare executive leadership position. And we've started a healthcare human factors laboratory that's run by a healthcare human factors engineer, which is really exciting to think about workflow and processes to help people be better at their jobs, safer, and maybe move us into the 21st century in healthcare.
Wonderful. We're completely out of time, but I'd like the last word to be yours. And so I'm asking you to say one word and one word only that would answer the question of why would the world care about microbiologists being successful?
One word.
One word.
We're completely
Community.
Community.
I'm going to just say safety, but I need more time to think.
Beautiful. We'd like to thank you for your leadership in your day jobs, to keep us safe and to keep us curious. And thank you for your leadership at ASM. And Colleen, good luck with your presidency. And thank you, Steve, for all you've done. Please join me in thanking Steve Finkel and Colleen Kraft.